Good morning, good afternoon, folks, depending on where you are on the continent. It is really lovely to get to spend a Friday lunch hour with all of you today, especially for those of you on the East Coast who have been digging out of inches, feet, piles of snow for the last week. Jerry, I know that's not your life, but some of us got 3 feet of snow this week, so it's been an adventure. So really lovely to be in the room with all of you today. Um, just to kind of get us started, I want to introduce myself and then my colleague Deb, who I'm thrilled to have join me today. Um, my name is Julia. I'm an organizational development practitioner and facilitator, and my work is in the nonprofit sector, working with nonprofits and foundations around people-centered organizational transformation and participatory strategy. And so I run these monthly webinars with the goal of just being helpful to the sector at a very strange moment for the sector, and trying to focus on sharing knowledge, sharing tools, sharing skills that help all of us to navigate complexity and uncertainty and to continue to drive mission impact in the important work we're all doing. So that's a little bit about me and kind of where this work comes from. And I'm joined today by my friend Deb. Deb, do you want to introduce yourself?
Thanks, Julia. Hi, I'm Deb. I'm an organizational effectiveness practitioner that's been practicing for a little bit over a decade across various industries. My focus has been to partner with leaders to strengthen culture, leadership, and how the work actually gets done. And so a lot of that work often comes down to the level of psychological safety within the organization and teams. So I am just so excited to be able to be here with you and dive into this topic. So thanks, Julia.
Thanks, Deb. Glad to have you here. So what are we here to do in this next 90 minutes? Our purpose today is to help us all think about psychological safety. It's been, I would say, a buzzword in leadership for a few years now. I think there's a lot of great work out there, what psychological safety is, how to drive it inside organizational systems. Obviously, we're not going to cover all of that today, but what Deb and I have done is try to pull out and synthesize some of the key things that we find to be really helpful as practitioners that we think could be really helpful to you too. And so hopefully by the end of our conversation today, we've kind of built a shared understanding of what psych safety is and how it impacts organizational health and our impact as organizations. We've talked a little bit about the factors that contribute to and detract from psych safety in organizations. We'll walk through a really simple framework to understand sort of how to think about psych safety in a really straightforward way. And we'll end with some really concrete practices that hopefully you feel like you can take back to your work tomorrow, Monday, to promote psych safety on your teams. I will say that we are recording this, so we'll circulate the recording of this afterwards, and we'll also be sharing the PowerPoint deck. And so if you're someone who likes to write things down, feel free, but also know that you'll get access to all these materials after the fact. Sound good so far? And as Deb and I kind of prepped for this, we are both like fairly chill, casual facilitators. It's a snowy Friday, so like, please treat this as a conversation. We'd love to hear you jump in with questions, or if you've got your own experiences related to psych safety in your work, in teams that you've led, in organizations that you've led. All of you bring so much wisdom to this topic that we really want to be able to promote that sharing across you too. So please feel free to jump in and let's have a nice conversation today. A little bit about why this topic and why now. I know I'm not saying anything you don't know when I say that the nonprofit sector is operating under a lot of increased external pressure, right? Funding instability. We're seeing shifts in policy that don't feel super predictable. There's a lot of new public scrutiny being directed at a lot of different kinds of nonprofits and their mandates. In addition to that, we know teams themselves are carrying a lot more internal strain, right? They're grappling with all that uncertainty at work, but lots of folks are carrying that kind of uncertainty at home too, depending on their identity and their own lived experiences. So things are just hard right now. And we know that the stakes of the work that most nonprofits are leading are higher than ever. The need is higher than ever. And the resources are getting thinner and harder to pin down. And so all of this creates real challenges that I know all of you are facing every day. And from Deb and my perspective, psych safety is one of the things that can help an organization and individuals stay resilient in tricky moments like this, that helps us learn, that helps us adapt, that helps us do the things that are important to us, even when we're under all of this pressure. So on that note, we're going to start by talking a little bit about how we would define psych safety, and then we'll go from there. So Deb, I'm going to hand things off to you, and feel free to direct me if I'm not clicking fast enough.
Certainly. Thanks. Thanks, Julia. So we're going to start off, again, everyone sort of getting on the same page so we can define what psychological safety is. So I'm curious, when you hear that phrase, psychological safety, what comes up for you? So if you can go ahead and type in the chat, word or phrase. Julia, I don't know if you want to allow people to come off mute if they want to chat.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Like, feel free to unmute and jump right in, or share in the chat if that's easier. I feel like Wally especially is going to have some really good insight in here, so we're really waiting to hear Wally's perspective.
Freedom to speak up. Yeah, love it. Diana.
Freedom to speak up. Nice.
Mm-hmm. Anyone else? Any other thoughts? Yeah,
share ideas and make mistakes. Yeah. I feel like that and make mistakes is such a big one, right?
Huge. Yeah.
Thinking out loud. Mm-hmm. Interpersonal relational comfort. Mm-hmm. It's real great.
Yeah, I love it. Funny, the thinking out loud without feeling the need to edit. Julia, you and I were just talking about image management, right? Right before we dived in. So
yeah,
I love it.
Teamwork that
works. Yeah, feeling comfortable. Yeah, feels true to who they are.
Free access to my box. Yes, Wally.
Love it. Love it. That's great. Yeah. All right. So, yeah, I think, you've all pretty much nailed it. So, Julia, we'll go ahead. So the actual concept of psychological safety has actually been around since the 1950s, believe it or not. But it was Harvard Business School professor Amy Edmondson back in 1999 who applied that concept to the team. And Amy defines it as a climate in which people feel safe to take risks, as you've said, share ideas, admit mistakes without fear of retribution. So you guys get an A+ on that. And you can go ahead. Yeah, thank you, Julia. So one of the things that I have, or some of the things that I've learned over time in working with teams on in organizations on psychological safety is this that I want to share with you. One is psychological safety is a journey, not a destination, right? It takes time to build. Consistency and commitment is key. And you don't have to, although you can, have this huge psychological safety program in order to embed it in your culture. You can look to those small, consistent actions that you do to help build the psychological safety. Psychological safety is actually variable from context to context. And what I mean by that is a team may feel a high level of psychological safety in let's say, their team meetings, but they may feel less psychologically safe in a department meeting, for example. And lastly, Amy Edmondson talks a little bit about this, and she says that psychological safety is strengthened by structure and process. So the more that you can create forms for input, help the team have guidelines around how they work together and how they engage in discussion, really strengthens the level of psychological safety within a team. So I'd be remiss if I didn't share what psychological safety isn't, or do a little bit of myth busting. So psychological safety isn't just about sort of the surface level niceness, so that everybody is sort of sitting around in a very zen sort of state, right? It's also not the avoidance of hard conversations or conflict. There is a level of being able to have constructive conflict and dialogue around what's actually getting in the way of the work. It's not about 100% enforcing consensus, 100% agreement. It's not an excuse for people to overshare or ignore other people's boundaries. Psychological safety also isn't permission for people not to perform, right, to meet performance goals. As a matter of fact, performance and psychological and high levels of psychological safety really go hand in hand. And lastly, it's not a guarantee, right, that because you are providing an opportunity for input, that everyone's ideas are going to be implemented.
And if I can jump in here, Deb, when we were planning for this, I really appreciated your idea of bringing this forward, because I know I've supported teams where this question of like, well, I don't feel safe to bring my ideas forward because the last time I brought an idea forward, we didn't move forward with it. And I think that's a tricky one, because on the one hand, you want to reward people for bringing ideas and you want to honor the energy that goes into like putting your hand up and saying, I think I've got a thought, can we work it through? But recognizing that like that doesn't always go through to fruition, and that isn't necessarily the guarantee that comes with being in an environment where you can share your ideas. And so I think that tension can be a little bit tricky to manage in some kind of team context. I'm looking around the room. I feel like I saw a couple people nodding. I don't know if that's something you've maybe experienced on your teams. I feel like it, particularly in cross-generational contexts, sometimes this can come up.
Yeah.
But I want to pause in case anyone else wants to jump in there. Yeah, Diane.
I was just talking about this with someone yesterday, in fact. This is Diane speaking. Thank you for calling on me. I think for me, the critical difference is that I don't need all of my ideas to be implemented, or even any of them, but communicate with me about why they can't be, and I will be more likely to bring them forward in the future.
Yeah. And you know, Diane, that's such a good point. I usually coach leaders on this, particularly as it usually pertains to change management, but applies to psychological safety as well, right? It's kind of saying up front, like, hey, we want to hear your input, we want to hear your ideas, but we're not able to implement everything, right? Because sometimes we have, it's in conflict with a process or it's a resource or what have you. So I think to your point, it is sort of the setup, right, that leaders can do to say, here's what we want to have this dialogue and we want your ideas, but they may not always be able to, be implemented for various reasons. I think the why behind it is important. Yeah. Love that. Yes, we can attack problems, but not attack people, right? We can evaluate. Exactly. It is evaluation of those ideas without attacking people's or making them feel like they don't belong.
Yeah. The other thing I'm hearing in what you're saying, Diane, I think also speaks to psych safety, which is being in an environment where leaders explicate their thinking, right? Like, obviously, not every leader can always say, here are the 15 reasons why we're doing this, because sometimes there's issues of confidentiality or privacy. But where possible, the more leaders are able to share, here's our thinking behind why we're going in this direction, helps to eliminate that sense of like what happens in leadership is like this black mystery box of things that we don't have access to. And that can feel really unsafe. If I don't know how my leaders make decisions, what they weigh and what they don't, that can lead to feelings of ambiguity and uncertainty. And so I like that point too, that the more leaders are able to sort of communicate that effectively, the more safety we can create. Mm-hmm. Hey, Heather, welcome.
Hi.
Great.
Do you want me to keep going, Deb?
Yeah, yes. If nobody has anything else they wanted to add. Okay. So let's talk about sort of the concrete impact of psychological safety. So right now we have over 20 years of research to support that psychological safety is a critical factor in high-performing teams. And what I'm going to do is just share just a few statistics that come from the Niagara Institute. So organizations and teams that feel a high level of psychological safety report improved satisfaction, not only within the workplace, but also outside of the workplace, which obviously makes sense. So you can see here, 74% less stress and 29% increase in life satisfaction. And also psychological safety increases retention because it's reducing turnover so that you are really being able to retain your talent, as you can see. And no big surprise that psychological safety, it helps to improve collaboration because you're enhancing teamwork and innovation, and you're seeing this 57% increase in teams coming together and collaborating, which also is linked to increased productivity. So again, according to the Niagara Institute, a 50% increase in productivity from people who are in psychologically safe teams and organizations. So we're seeing that there is real business impact here to psychological safety. Yep. Okay, Julia. And we can...
I was going to say, any reactions to this before we move? To me, this feels like, yeah, this totally makes sense. But I'm wondering if there's anything that strikes you that feels surprising, or if you've experienced other kinds of benefits from being part of a team where there's a high degree of psych safety. It's okay if not. We just want to make sure that we're learning from all the smart people.
And it may be, I might have missed it, or maybe it's coming up. But for me, I just, even when the slide first came up, and yes, all of this is true, right? But for me, it's like, what does psychological safety look like? In practice, right? Like, so yeah, it sounds great in theory, but in practice, what does it look like?
I will give you a hint that you have just read the title for our next slide.
Oh, okay.
That's like a segue. Was that a plant, Julia?
Received.
Heather,
but I also want to lift up what Diane's point too about patient safety. I do a lot of work in healthcare settings, and absolutely there is a very strong link between psych safety and patient safety. Because psych safety is the space to say, hey, I'm worried about something. I think there might be something wrong. And knowing that if you're not right, it's okay. But if you are right, you might be making a difference in the quality of someone's care, right? And so I think psych safety in a healthcare setting is hugely critical.
Yeah, huge.
So do we want to take advantage of that segue?
Yes. So, as Heather so kindly set up for us, that's all great. We see the benefits, we see the research. So what does it actually look like in practice, not in theory? So, as we said, psychological safety matters. So what I'd like you to do is drop in the chat if you think about we might have gone back a little bit there.
Sorry, I forgot that you were going to ask the group, and so I tried to pull back so that the answers weren't on the screen.
There you go. That's okay. That's okay. No worries. We're all informal here. So what I'd like you to do is think about a team that you've been on in the workplace or outside of the workplace that had a high level of psychological safety. And And you can just think about, even if it was just a moment in time. So perhaps it was a particular meeting that you were in or what have you. But when you experienced high levels of psychological safety, what did you observe? So what did it look like? What behaviors were present? Or if you're like, listen, Deb, I've got nothing in my past experience that's was a high level of psychological safety. Imagine what that would look like to you. What behaviors do you think you would see? So either way, go ahead and type that in the chat, or you can come off mute if you will. Yeah, face-to-face time, dropping in, easy collaboration. Mm-hmm. What else might it look like, or has it looked like? Validation, acknowledgement of your ideas.
Nice.
Open doors. Avery, I don't know if you mean that physically or figuratively or both maybe. Yeah, low, meeting after meeting. Oh, yes. They're talking about themselves, right? Yep. Seen and supported.
Yeah, that meeting after the meeting is really hitting me, because I was in an organization where, like, yeah, we meet and then 5 of us out of the 7 sneak off to another room to debrief, like, what on earth just happened there?
Yeah.
Because you can't talk about it in the room.
Right. Oh my gosh, yes.
Sense of humor. No commitment or follow through.
Yes,
That's nice.
Yes, you just keep circling and circling. Yeah, modeling language and culture, bringing, 100% to the table. Yeah. Modeling is so important. I bet. Yes, leaders sharing their vulnerabilities, right? Or gaps. Yeah, saying, I don't know. One of the best leaders I ever had was, I don't know, but I know who I can ask, you know?
Which is so powerful, because if your leader can say, I don't know, but let's figure it out, then suddenly it's okay for everybody to say, I don't know, but let's figure it out. Yeah. Magic.
Yeah. And I had never seen that in my career, so it kind of blew my mind, to be honest. Yeah, people posturing rather than contributing. Yeah.
Yeah. Again, that image management.
Right. So, Julia, shall we
Yeah.
up on here, and
I'll just I'll let these kind of play out, and then you can talk through them.
Kind of talk through. I'll just do some highlights here, right? So it really is what you all have put in the chat, right? So high levels of psychological safety, people are, having constructive dialogues in conflict. They're being collaborative, and they're showing up to, as someone was mentioning, right, 100% of their self to the table. And also admitting, like, hey, I made this mistake, or hey, I need help. And again, taking that their accountability and responsibility as well, holding themselves accountable. And then low psychological safety, what you can see is, errors are hidden, risks are avoided, questions aren't asked, people are defaulting to silence rather than contribution. We, there's this phrase that we had when I was getting certified in psychological safety around dangerous silence, right, equals avoidable failure, right? So, so you're not talking about risks and so on and so forth. So, so there you go. So now we have talked about what it looks like. What I also want to stress before we kind of go on to the next slide is that what you're describing isn't behaviors that just show up randomly. So research from Amy Edmondson actually shows that psychological safety tends to cluster in a few consistent areas. And we're going to share that with you next. So Amy Edmondson has identified what she calls these 4 key areas of psychological safety. And they're really simple, but really powerful. So one is the willingness to help. So how readily is the team feel like they can support one another? Inclusion and diversity, what's the degree of openness of the team to different perspectives? The attitude towards risk and failure. So how comfortable is the team with taking risks and learning from mistakes? And then the last one, Julia, there's one more.
Oh, sorry.
That's okay.
There you go.
Thank you. Is open conversation. So what is the ability of the team to be able to discuss challenges and share ideas freely? So these 4 areas of psychological safety gives leaders a much more practical lens, right, to look at psychological safety. Not do we have psychological safety or don't we, but instead, where are we stronger and where might we need to focus? So again, this isn't about scoring your team, but it's looking at being able to step back and look at patterns in these 4 areas. And you'll notice later, here's a, what do they call this? Not foreboding, a preview.
Foreshadowing.
Foreshadowing, that's it. So here's a little foreshadowing for you. You'll notice later that the practices that we're going to be talking about will map back to these areas, and that's intentional. Oh, I see, Julia. You answered the question about the slides. After.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Anything you wanted to add, Julia, or anything anybody wanted to say before we move on? Really simple. I feel like it's a very easy, Jimmy, thing to remember as you're thinking about psychological safety with your team. Okay.
And then I think to build on this, we also wanted to take a minute to talk about psych safety and identity. Oh, sorry, I'm taking over. I don't think I'm supposed to be taking over. Carry on. Nope, ignore me.
That's okay. I'll talk a little bit about it and you can feel free to just jump in, Julia. So thank you for that segue. So we've been talking about team psychological safety, but we want to recognize that psychological safety is experienced individually, even when it's shaped by team conditions. So what feels psychologically safe for one person may feel unsafe for someone else. And so our experience of psychological safety is shaped by a mix of our identity, the culture in which we were raised or are, operating in, our family norms, and our past experiences with authority, conflict, and risk. So there is no single threshold, if you will, for a psychological safety that will work for everyone. And for some people, reaching a place where they feel psychologically safe simply takes longer, and that's not a problem to fix. So inclusive leadership means designing conditions for different starting points and not expecting everyone to adapt to one dominant norm. And we'll talk a little bit about how you can account for that. But Julia, anything that you wanted to add? Or that
Sorry, clearly I was just really excited to talk about this.
Yeah, no, it's important.
For me, what's important here is that we're now naming the direct intersection between psych safety and creating equitable and inclusive workplaces. Because part of this is recognizing that because of all the various systems of oppression that we have created in our national culture that get absorbed by our organizational cultures, we know that when I think particularly about image management, so how much more some identity groups have to manage the way that they show up, manage the way that other people experience them as a way to protect themselves from stereotyping behavior or discrimination in organizational systems. And so it's really important, I think, to name that this is going to look different for every person depending on how their identity comes together and how critical intersectionality is when we think about multiple layers of oppressed identity aspects as well. And so again, zooming out to that perspective of the leader, recognizing that everybody's coming at this from a different perspective. Not everybody is going to participate in a team in the same way. because of what they carry with their identity. And so psych safety isn't about saying, well, we all need to be showing up in the same way. We all need to be participating in after work social events in this way. We all need to be bearing our souls and meeting check-ins. Like, that's going to be different for everybody. And so it's about how do we create the conditions for there to be space for everybody to show up in a way that's going to be resonant for them.
Yeah.
Which clearly I, get really jazzed about because I totally jumped in ahead of Deb. But Jerry, I see you've got your hand up. What would you want to add to that, or maybe disagree with me?
I'm just noticing that there's a dilemma that we're framing up here. On the one hand, if we're going to be make it psychologically safe for everybody to bring their wild diversity into the room, now I have to confront people that have very different rhythms and sensitivities and temperaments. I try to be fair by treating everybody the same, but now I've sort of said everybody is different and has their own kind of rhythm and response style. So and that may seem like favoritism if I treat everybody differently. I just realized that as a manager here, I'm kind of stuck on the two horns of this dilemma. I think it's unavoidable. I think it'd be nice if companies actually admitted that we're not all cut from the same cloth. But it does push on an attempt to be fair by being treating everyone equally.
Yeah, that's a good flag. Diane, I saw your hand go up. Well, do you want to respond to that or offer a thought there?
I love that acknowledgement, because I think that a lot of times in management training, we're told that the ideal is to actually treat people equitably, like to give everyone what they need, not to give everyone the same thing. And to Jerry's point, I think that's hard. I think it does start to look like favoritism. I think especially when you layer in reasonable accommodations that maybe are not well known to others, or things that are private, what is fair and allows somebody to do their best work may not always be embraced by the rest of the team. It's hard. It's a hard tension to hold.
Yeah.
And in that, I think one of the tensions I struggle with a lot alongside organizations I'm working with, and I feel like this is maybe a piece of this or at the core of this, is that as a leader, you have accountability to the individuals on your team and you have accountability to the organization as a whole. And sometimes those two things work in concert, where you can do one thing and it serves both of them. Sometimes the needs of an individual run counter to the needs of the organization. And then you as a leader need to figure out, like, how do I skew? Like, what direction do I lean in? And it's like, it's a real tap dance and there's no one answer, but I think it's one of the hardest tensions that thoughtful leaders face, is like, how do I navigate that line? Go ahead, Heather.
I think for me, just sharing how I navigate those things really in my head is sort of just like, not thinking of it as like, it's a humane thing, right? We're all humans, right? Like I have children. So if you have children, you might be able to relate to this. Like, I have more than one child. And so I don't treat them all equally, though. I don't treat them all the same. I love them all the same, but I don't treat them all the same. It is equal in the sense of sort of like meeting people where they're at and just meeting their needs that they have. And I think that's really what it's about. Are we meeting each other where we're at? Some people are at different levels, and can we meet individual where they're at and go from there with them?
Yeah.
And I would also say, at least in my mind, equity is not always, it does not equate to equality, right? And to your point, Heather, right? It's like, okay,
some people have
what works for the individual as well, meeting them where they're at. I'm sorry, somebody was just going ahead to say something. Go ahead. Oh, did I mishear somebody maybe?
Heard it too, but maybe it was just a sound thing. And I feel like, Deb, some of what you're going to show us in the second half of this is around like practical ways to grapple with this that acknowledge that everybody kind of shows up in a different place. And that's just the nature of working with teams.
Yeah. And right, exactly. So the next slide is really going to talk about what's an approach or a mindset that you can have tucked away in your toolkit that can help, right, account for people having different starting places. Again, nothing is going to be perfect. I think you had mentioned, Julia, right? There's no, sort of one magic thing. But this slide is really, as I said, an approach or a mindset for you to think about practicing psychological safety in a way that's safe, inclusive, and sustainable, regardless of whatever micro habits or team exercise that you choose, which Julia is going to share with you in a moment. So think about, how can I create as anonymous input as I can? How can I ensure that there's optional participation and collective accountability? So let me kind of walk you through this. So first, you want to think about, how can I gather input? I put here semi-anonymously because when you're in real time, it's going to be really hard for you unless you're doing a anonymous survey, right, to collect data anonymously. So think about, for example, if you're in person or you're in the virtual world, sticky notes or those kinds of things, right? So that everyone can participate or just observe at their own comfort level. And then you as a leader taking that input and synthesizing what are the themes, right? So sharing patterns and not names. And then helping the team to prioritize, let's say, 1 or 2 behaviors or practices for a period of time, like let's say 30 days, and using low pressure methods such as dot voting, for example, or if you're in the virtual world, thumbs up, thumbs down, polling, those kinds of things. And then lastly, reviewing and adjusting whatever practices or behaviors the team is putting into place to say, okay, what worked, what didn't, what are we going to keep, what are we going to change over time. So again, psychological safety isn't built as a single exercise. It's built through those shared practices, consistency, and collective accountability over time. So again, I'm just going to stress, use this approach when you're running any team exercise or micro habit, right? So gather input safely, share patterns, co-create next steps, and always keep participation optional and low pressure. So that can help you kind of smooth out, right, those different levels of starting points for folks.
Mm-hmm.
Just putting up ideas on the wall. Yes, exactly, Jerry. Right. Back in the old days, we'd use flip charts or sticky notes. Now we have a virtual world, right? I might be dating myself there for a moment, but I call that semi-anonymous because when you're in real time, if somebody's really paying attention, I don't know, I guess you could say, oh, that's so-and-so's handwriting and that's their idea. But most often in the team interventions that I've done, nobody's really usually doing that. Julia, anything you wanted to add or anything from participants?
Nothing from me. Anything else from folks about sort of this cycle that you can go through before we move into the next section, which is really going to be about some specific tools that you can take back to your team to start to build these kinds of practices? Cool. So far, so good?
Great.
All right. So, okay, now it's definitely my turn. Yes.
Over to you.
Part of what we try to do with these webinars is give you some content around what are we talking about, why does it feel important, how to recognize it, but then also some really practical things that you could practice like Monday if it felt like this is something you want to bring into your team. And so I'm going to walk you through some more practical things. Any of the exercises we show you on the screen when we circulate the deck, There's an annex in the deck that I won't show you live that has detailed facilitation instructions on how to do each of these things. So like, if you want to do these exercises in your team, like here's how you'd set it up, here's how you'd frame it, here's how you'd actually walk through it. There's also going to be a link at the end of the PowerPoint. It's a Friday. If you want to sign up for free office hours, so if there's anything here that you really want to take back to your team, but you want to talk it through with someone, we can also do that. So let's start with what we call leadership micro habits. So I think I'm not saying anything radical to this group of people when I say that the way that we show up as leaders has a huge impact on what others experience as safe and not safe on our teams. And so what behaviors that we model as leaders, what behaviors we reward as leaders, what behaviors we discourage as leaders are all ways that we can shape psychological safety. And so what we wanted to call out were what Deb and I call like micro habits, like not a huge like whole new thing you need to do, but like small places where you can start to shift the culture or the tone on your team. And so we categorize these based on those earlier categories of psychological safety factors from Amy Edmondson's research. And so when we talk about willingness to help, normalizing, hey, where do you need support this week? Being the one that asks the question, who needs support this week? Or I need support this week. Making it okay to say, hey, I'm in a little over my head this week, or like I've got some space and I can offer it to someone. So the power of the leader being the one who says that, or not even a formal leader in a formal leadership role, but just someone who has a lot of social capital on the team, or who's an informal leader, or who's really well regarded and trusted. Being the person that says out loud, like, I need some help. Nothing bad happens to me means other people can ask for help too. Continuing through the micro habits, thinking about inclusion and diversity. I think one of the most powerful questions we can ask is who's not here, who's not at this table, who's not part of this decision, who's going to be impacted by the work that we're doing, who's not represented, and what do we do about that? So making explicit the need to have diverse perspectives and lived experiences in our collaboration and decision-making processes. And inviting dissent, inviting disagreement. I think as a facilitator, Deb, I don't know if you've experienced this, but we're kind of trained to like herd everybody toward alignment, right? Like we want to surface where we agree. But the best, most durable ideas are the ones that survive when we say, who doesn't agree? Who's got a big problem with this? Who sees an issue here? Who doesn't think that this idea could stand on its own? And so by inviting that, you both get better outcomes, better ideas, but you're also modeling and making safe the practice of putting up your hand and saying, I don't agree. I'm not with the rest of the group on this. As leaders, our attitude to risk and failure is also critical. We are all human beings who make mistakes like every day, right? Like I make a mistake at least once a day, probably like more than that. And so the more that leaders or folks with social capital or informal power in organizations are able to acknowledge their failings as human beings, acknowledge the things that they didn't go the way we expected, and lean into that as a learning opportunity versus like, and then the world ended, or then I got fired, or then like, no, something didn't go according to plan, we learned and we moved on. And leaders can also be the person to ask in a moment of failure, yeah, failure is normal, but what did we learn from this? So how do we move this forward in a learning orientation?
Yeah, what's that phrase, Julia? You learn more from your failures than you do from your successes, right?
Oh, so true. So painful, but so true. And then finally, and I think it was Avery who talked about open doors in your feedback earlier. How can leaders model that like both literal and, I don't say metaphysical, but that's not what I mean. The open door. How can we create the conditions for folks to check in and connect and to have that be part of the rhythm of the team. Maybe we're checking in on each other as a team check-in before we get into the business of the work. How are we doing this week? What's something that you're really proud of? What's something you're struggling with? Getting that temperature check. Oh, Jerry, I love that. Thanking people when they do put their hand up to say, I disagree, or they do put their hand up to say, I got it wrong. Rewarding that behavior is so powerful.
Yeah.
And encouraging your team to not just talk about what are you doing, I check, but what are you learning from that work? And that comes from trying things. They don't go according to plan, trying them differently. Oh, asking people what they're proud of. I love that one. Automatic way to get someone to light up in a meeting. What have you done this week that you're really proud of? So I just want to pause there. Deb, is there anything you want to add? And for those of you that really try to drive psych safety in your teams, are there other behaviors that either you've observed or that you've tried to model that you find to be really effective?
Yeah, I just want to sort of underline, Julia, what you said, right? That creating a psychologically safe environment doesn't have to be this big, heavy, huge, program.
Strategic initiative.
Yeah, right. It can just be, again, thinking about how you interact with your team. What are these small opportunities, right, that you can weave in? Because, right, we're all, as Julia said at the start, right, we're working in times of divisiveness, of lean resources. So we really, as Julia and I were talking about this, we're really thinking about what are things that are simple that don't really require a lot of extra work.
Yeah. Thanks for that, Deb.
Yeah.
Any thoughts from the group in terms of behaviors that you've seen be really impactful?
I will say a couple of behaviors that I think that have been really useful is that I've seen is like creating cultures where self-care is really sort of like not just not just encouraged, but is backed up by the way you're doing things. And so
Nice.
sort of, and that includes like if somebody calls out and they're sick, like not giving them attitude or acting like they're lying or something crazy like that, like those things have big impacts.
Yeah.
And really like encouraging that person, okay, take care of yourself. And so
Nice.
like creating that culture with like good self-care.
Yeah, I love that. Thank you, Heather. And then from Christina in the chat, we've got following through on your word. So simple, but like, of course I feel safer if I believe the things people around me say, if I can count on them. Easy. Well, easy, but still.
Yeah, so important for building trust, right?
Yeah. So let's talk about, we're now going to walk through 3 specific exercises that you could do in your team to start to surface this conversation. Again, it doesn't have to be this big, like complicated strategic initiative. It could be, hey, the next time you've got a team meeting, spend 45 minutes or an hour doing this. Surface some ideas, start a conversation, build some shared vocabulary. And again, there are facilitation guides for each of these in the deck that you'll get. And we're actually, for folks that can stay for the full 90 minutes, we're actually going to try one of them out so you kind of have a lived experience of how they feel. So the first thing we want to talk about is how you build clarity around values and behaviors. And so I'll say, as someone who has lived in the nonprofit sector for my whole career, I think we are one of those sectors where we're real good about being clear about the values that we bring to our work for other people over there outside. We are not so good at thinking about how do those values apply to us. I have a colleague who talks about, the idea of making your insides match your outsides, right? What that can create in an organizational culture is something called moral dissonance, which is the experience of we say we believe these things, but we are not acting in a way that represents that. And in severe cases, there's actually a ton of research from COVID that's fascinating. That can actually impact people in the same way that trauma can. If we're living in a system where we say we do this, but we actually do this, like it can be very distressing. And so one easy thing that we can do as a whole organization or as a team is say, when we say transparency, when we say equity, when we say collaboration, what does that actually mean? And how do we go about doing it? And so for this kind of exercise, you can sit down and say, hey, based on our values as an organization, or if you don't have those, maybe you come up with them first. Build a shared list of definitions. What do those values actually mean to us in practice, in reality? How do we know them when we see them? And then as a team, you can brainstorm what are the specific behaviors that we can see that demonstrate that value in action. And what's important about this is this cannot be abstract. So like this can't be like show respect. What's respect? What does that look like? How do I know it when I see it? This is the tangible stuff. Like if we say we're a transparent organization, we've decided that means that within 48 hours of every leadership team meeting, we send out minutes. Specific, tangible, observable, not abstract. So for each of your values as a team, talk about what are the specific behaviors that we want to commit to that allow us to uphold our values, to close that gap between how we are and who we say we are. And then as a group, talk about how do we hold ourselves accountable to this? What is our culture of feedback? If we're in a place where we can give and receive feedback, if that's safe on our team, how do we agree that we're going to say, hey, Deb, I know we're working really hard on our transparency behaviors. I noticed that after the last meeting, you didn't circulate those minutes. The impact on me was I felt like it wasn't a transparent meeting. How do we hold each other accountable for that? I've done this with clients. It can be incredibly powerful, closing that gap between the organization that we are to our constituents and the organization that we are to ourselves. I want to pause there to see if anybody has any questions, or if maybe you've done work like that before, what that's been like. When a particular value would be difficult to honor. That's really nice. That's really nice, because that's when values kind of matter the most, not when it's easy to uphold them, but when you would rather do anything except that thing.
That's right.
So being clear about that. I also ask folks to say, what does this value not look like? You know, what are the behaviors that don't align with this, that are maybe embedded in our culture that we want to move away from? So this is one exercise that you can do with your team or again with your organization. The next thing we want to talk about, and this really connects to the conversation we had about identity, is how do we build awareness of what we each experience as exclusionary versus inclusive behaviors. So what feels inclusive to me is going to be different than what feels inclusive to Deb, is going to be different than what feels inclusive to Heather, is going to be different than what feels inclusive to Avery, because a lot of that is rooted in who we are, our lived experience, our past, right? All the stuff we bring with us, and that is not visible. And what that means is that even on the most well-meaning team, we can do things that have the impact of excluding people. So like a classic example I see all the time is organizations that do after hours happy hours. Oh, we're all going to hang out. We're all going to have fun together. We're going to go to the bar after. If you have caregiving responsibilities after work, kids or elder parents or siblings or whatever, after work might not be an option for you. You might always have to say no to social things if they happen after hours because you have other commitments. If you're someone who doesn't drink, for whatever reason you don't drink and you don't want to be in a bar, does social stuff always have to be wrapped around having a drink together? And so even though the intention is for let's have a nice social like relationship thing, we're acting in ways that exclude our colleagues unintentionally with the best of intentions. And so an exercise like this can help build awareness of, on this team, how do each of us experience exclusion and inclusion? And are there specific behaviors that we want to align around that feel inclusive to all of us? And so what you might do as a group is, again, over the course of a meeting, maybe an hour, have folks share on Post-its what feels inclusive for me, what behaviors make me feel really included, what behaviors leave me feeling like I'm on the outside. And then rather than having a conversation about, okay, Deb, what do you need? Jerry, what do you need? Heather, what do you need? Again, creating some distance to promote psychological safety, look at the whole and say, oh, I noticed that for most people, these behaviors feel really inclusive. I notice for most people, these behaviors feel really exclusive. So looking at trends and patterns rather than kind of calling individual people out to say, what creates space for me to show up in my best way and what doesn't. So again, this could be an individual team conversation. This could be something you do in a larger organizational setting if you want to be driving culture change or do culture work together. Thanks for joining us, Nicole. You'll see the rest of it in the video if you need it. And again, I want to pause to say, has anyone done something like this? And if so, is there anything you learned about that you'd want to tell us about? And this is the one we'll trial in a couple minutes. Cool, okay. Third exercise is around feedback, the dreaded word. When I was in grad school, we did a whole module on giving and receiving feedback, and the whole thing was like, feedback's a gift. And it's like, is it a gift I can return? Like, do I have to accept? Does it come with a receipt so that I can give it back? I think sounds good, Meredith. Thank you for joining us. I think American culture is pretty conflict averse. If you've ever interacted with folks in Northern Europe, I don't think they have trouble with feedback. I don't think the Germans have a feedback averse culture, or the Swedes. In the US, we have some awkwardness around giving and receiving feedback in a really direct way, especially in a culture where you have low psychological safety. Giving and receiving feedback can feel incredibly threatening, incredibly risky for a whole host of reasons. And yet, giving and receiving feedback both helps to create a psychologically safe culture and is a hallmark of a high-performing team. You can't be high-performing if you're not able to talk about what's working and what's not. And so this exercise is a way to begin to have feedback conversations if that's not a skill you've been able to build as a team yet. And so it's a really simple, this is something you can use as like an after-action review or a feedback session around, oh, we're reviewing this particular draft or this product, or we just had this big meeting and now we want to talk about it. You have everybody in the group start a statement with these phrases. I like. So I'm affirming what worked in that context. I really like, Deb, how you showed up and how you talked about that topic at the beginning. It was really well done. I wish is a way to talk about potential room for improvement. I wish that we had worked the timing out so that I wasn't running 5 minutes over right now. I'm fine. We have plenty of time, but as an example. I wonder if we did it this way or if we did it that way, what that would unlock for us. Next, let's test something out, try something new, share some ideas. And so this format is a way for everybody to share what's on their mind in a way that's non-threatening, that's not directed at a given individual. You're asking everyone to do it, which means there's not one person taking the awkward risk. We're all taking the awkward risk together. And so this can be a way for you to have that conversation and to get more comfortable with giving and receiving feedback. Pause again there. Oh, sorry, didn't.
Yeah, the last, there you go.
So I wanted to pause again there to see, this is an adaptation of an Agile Scrum practice. So if there's anyone here from the Agile world or has a secret background, thanks, Christina, in software development, maybe this is something that you've played with. Cool. So any questions about any of these practices? The idea is that these are like, again, simple things that you can apply right away that don't require like an org-wide launch of an initiative on psych safety. Do they feel like pretty accessible, pretty straightforward? Diane, I'm assuming you're reacting to the cat and not my brilliance. Yeah, that's fair.
Oh, so
I don't play poker, in case you were wondering. I have no chill at all.
sorry about her. I found that if I try to get rid of her, she'll just keep coming back, but she'll lose interest on her own. So apologies if this is distracting for anyone.
I think it's the best part of Zoom meeting is meeting everybody's pets. So
Yeah, I think COVID really helped us to realize, right, that there is, or normalize that there's a life outside of work. So
shocking.
right.
Can I ask a question building on that?
Yeah.
There's an issue about psychological safety I frankly don't know what to do with. Because in a way, we're inviting people to bring their whole self into the organization.
Mm-hmm.
What happens if my spouse just filed for divorce, or my kid just got diagnosed as autistic, or I'm trying to put a aging parent into a home? In other words, my personal life is a shit show.
Mess. Yep.
If you ask me how I'm doing, what I want to say is that, well, I talked to my divorce lawyer, and it looks like it's going to be I mean, I think there's a tension between being professional and being a whole person, because parts of our whole person aren't professional and they're a mess. So I'm just wondering, how do we deal with people who are honest enough to say, I'm struggling with a very challenging personal issue, so it's hard for me to focus. I need help this week because I have to spend a lot of time with my physical therapist because my back pain is intolerable. I mean, I think that's a tricky boundary to manage, and I don't know how to do that.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I think it kind of comes back to that tension between being able to be open and allow people, right, their humanity and things that are going on within their lives, but also where's sort of that line of the oversharing piece. So that's not to say that people can't say, hey, do you know what I mean? I'm getting a divorce, so I'm doing really crappy today and my focus is off and I need help, versus an individual conversation, for example, with a team member who is like, look, I really just need to have a safe space to kind of right, unload all of this stuff going on. So I think it's that balance of, and I'm not saying I have, sort of the magic answer around that, Jerry, but I do think there's also trying to straddle the line between, what you just said. Hey, I need help this week. It's going it's a real crappy week. And, here's what's happening. Can someone help? Versus,
I guess leaders need to model that boundary.
Yeah.
I would agree.
Leaders are saying, I'm having a really tough week for some personal issues, so it would really help me a lot if people could do da 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 da.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
Okay. Thank you.
Heather, it sounds like you maybe have something to add as well. Love to
Yeah.
hear.
I think that was a great thought, Jerry, that yes. And it's like, we are human, we are messes. And if at the end of the day, like, we're all a part of nonprofits, we're helping in some way, shape, or form, and we're most likely serving people, right? And so, like, if we can't help the people who we're working alongside of, how are we saying that we're helping the rest of the community, right? So, like, we're all human, we all go through stuff. Sometimes life is messy for each of us, right? And that's okay. I think it's okay to sort of take somebody's hand and say, hey, I'm going to walk with you on this, and I know that it's impacting your work, and that's okay. We're going to figure this out together.
That's right. Yeah, that's right. It's kind of like that whole sometimes you have to put your oxygen mask on first, right? For you.
Yeah.
Right.
Go ahead, Diane.
I'd like to add on to that and say, and sometimes the kindest thing we can do for somebody is to be really clear about what we need from them in the workplace and
Yep.
what that looks like and how we can support them in achieving that.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I also think, yeah, I love that, Diana. I also think there could be, again, depending upon your team and the person, there could be the opportunity to, if someone, Drew, is feeling like they're, sort of maybe oversharing, saying, okay, so helping to direct them in the conversation around, so, okay, what do you need, right? How can we help? And so it's sort of trying to redirect, and I don't know if corral is quite the right word, but to your point, Diane,
Manage.
how do we set up some boundaries, right, that are healthy, and allowing the person to be heard? And I think about it sort of in, in different interventions that I've done over my career in change management, where people are really ticked off. Do you know what I mean? They're angry and they're going on and on and on and on and on. And I'll give them the space to kind of, you know, discharge some of that emotion, but then redirect them. Okay, so that's what you don't want. Tell me now. Let's use that to create what you do want. And so maybe there's an opportunity, again, depending on you and your team, to help that person come to, okay, we understand, we recognize that you're having a difficult time. How can we help?
Hmm. The piece of this too that maybe I'll add, I find this conversation really fascinating. Actually, separately working on a paper with a colleague around sort of like the leadership cost of empathy and sort of like finding that line or that boundary. And I think part of what we're naming is that building psychological safety on a team has a very explicit intersection of individual agency, where on the one hand, saying we want people to feel like they can bring their full selves to work. I might slightly reframe that to say, we want people to feel safe to bring as much of themselves as they'd like to work. Because how many people have I worked with who've said, like, I don't need to make friends. Like, I have this whole rich life out here. I don't need those things here. I don't want to do the like social pop. Like, that's not what I'm here for. I don't want to bring those parts of myself. And that's allowed. You don't have to bring those parts of yourself. If you wanted to, for people who do want to, I think we want to create the conditions where that feels safe, but not as an obligation to like bare your soul. All are welcome, none are forced. I love that.
Yeah,
That's so
great.
Good. I think the other end of the agency spectrum is recognizing that being in a psychologically safe environment doesn't mean that you're not accountable for the impact of your behaviors. And so I forget who it was that said, like, talked about clarity of expectations, that even when we are in a space where we want to promote open communication and collaboration and authenticity and all those things, that doesn't mean that I'm not responsible for managing how my behavior impacts my colleagues. And if I am going through a rough divorce and every day I'm in the office and I just can't keep my head up and I'm angry and I'm tired or whatever the things are, to a certain degree, we know we're going to be dragging people down with me. And so how do I both take up space and acknowledging where I'm at and invite people where I need them to come on that walk with me, to your point, Heather, but not doing that in a way that torpedoes everybody's sort of like emotional health on the team. Yeah. And I think, that's emotional self-management, right? And I think we still have accountability for that, regardless of how psychologically safe our teams are. That would be my 2 cents.